All right, second thing. Are you ready? Remember that the wisdom of God is secured or securing your salvation. Everything about God's plan to save us through Christ looked doomed to fail. Have you ever thought about that? Stop and think about this. A teenage girl in a stable in a little flea bag town. No offense to Bethlehem. A carpenter's son? And then consider the disciples that Jesus chose to whom he would delegate his cause. The guys that he was going to leave his purpose and things. You remember those guys? Not exactly the top of the class group, right? You stop and think about that. That it almost seems foolish, but listen to this. The most foolish move of all was the crucifixion. Now, Carol, this is where the 1 Corinthians 21:24 connects this for us. 21 through 24. 1 Corinthians 1, 21 through 24. Let me just read what I have written here, okay? And then you can look at it in your version. But for since in God's wisdom, the world did not know God through wisdom. In other words, God rejected the possibility of salvation by human intellect and wisdom. We will see why in a moment, okay? God was pleased to save those who believe through the foolishness of the message preached. For the Jews ask for signs and the Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach that Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. Yet to those who are called, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ is God's power and God's wisdom. Is that kind of something that went along with what you guys have in your Bible? Somebody read if you got another version of that. Go ahead and read that. 21 through 24.
What version are you
I didn't put down a reference here. I don't know which where I got this out of. It might have been the ESV. So
God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never know him through human wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
He has used our foolish preaching to save those who believe. It is foolish to the Jews who ask for signs from heaven, and it is foolish to the Greeks who seek human wisdom. So when we preach that Christ was crucified, the Jews are offended, and the Gentiles say it is all nonsense. But to those who called by God to salvation, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God.
Yeah. See, in God's infinite wisdom, he chose a way of salvation through Christ that looks totally insane to the world. And we know that's a fact because we know people that will not believe it. And folks, listen, even when Jesus Christ comes for the second time, there will still be people that will be on this earth or that have already died that they just didn't get it. They didn't believe it. No one on earth would have come up with a plan involving the brutal murder of the Son of God for sinners. Yet, at precisely the most foolish-looking moment, God's wisdom triumphs. And at the point of his greatest weakness, God's power is unleashed. Why? Why? Verse 25. Because God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. In God's all-wise plan, this was the perfect way to achieve the greatest goal. And what goal was that? Somebody go down to verse 31 and read 31.
Therefore, as the scriptures say, if you want to boast, boast only about the Lord.
See, this is what his wisdom was aiming at. God chose us, purchased us, called us, and gave to us everything else involving our salvation, our salvation, in such a way as to strip us of all self-congratulation and replace it with what? Glory in only the Lord. Only him. No one, the one who boasts must boast only in what? I am saved because of Jesus Christ. That's it. There's no other reason. None. And I make this point for this reason. You and I don't know enough to fathom why pain and suffering and injustice and brutality happens to us or in this world, or in this sin-wrecked world. Like Job, we come to God with our questions. But in the end, God simply points out that in the grand scope of things, right? You remember back to Job? One of the most famous things that he asks Job is three words. Where were you? Where were you when I did what? You remember that? Do you guys remember that part? He starts telling when I created, well, when I did this, when I did that. We come to God with our questions and he reminds us that, you know what? You know nothing. But it's not to beat us down and it's not to make us feel, it's to remind us that, you know what? I have a better plan that you can trust in. Imagine trying to sit with Einstein and trying to kind of explain 1 + 1 to him. I want you to know that when it comes to divine wisdom, we haven't been there and we haven't done that. It takes time and repeated lessons and humility to bring us to a place where we can rest in his wisdom and trust his plan.